Hello and welcome to the launch of the Eastern Home Counties region workload campaign. My name's Lydia Richards and I'm the regional official for the Eastern Home Counties. And we're going to be joined today as well by Joe Grady, the General Secretary of the Union, and also Jane Thompson, who a lot of you will remember from when she worked in the regional office, but now works in the national bargaining team. We've had a huge, overwhelming number of people register for this session, which I think goes to show just how serious the issue of workload is for all of our members and how the issue of workload is going to be critical over the next coming year. We're aware of the fact that workloads for staff have been increasing steadily over the last few years, regardless of the pandemic, but that the pandemic has now put additional pressures and made everything worse, with staff having to adapt to new ways of working and changing the way they work and changing demands on them in completely new and different environments, which is why we in the regional office decided that we needed to respond to that by launching a workload campaign for the members in the region and to support the branches in the region so that we can get improvements as quickly as possible. I also want to welcome Rebecca Spencer, who I should have done earlier, sorry about that, who is our BSL interpreter for this session. And what we're going to do today is introduce the campaign and talk about some of the things that members can do. And then we've got a load of questions that you all sent in advance, so thank you very much for that. We'll do our best to get through as many of those as possible. We've tried to kind of collate them so that we can take them in a more general form so that we can actually answer the queries we've got. But to start off with, we thought it'd be helpful to have Joe Grady just talk us through the national picture and explain what's going on generally. So over to you, Joe.
Hi, thank you for that. And hi, Rebecca. Hello to everyone that's joined us. As Lydia's just said, we've had over 100 people register for this event, which is amazing. Really excellent work is happening in this region, and I'm so pleased that this region's taken the initiative to really push forward a workload campaign. Obviously, for so many of us, lockdown, the pandemic, the spill out from that on our working lives has been huge. I don't think there's been many sectors that have been more affected than education. The language that we've had to endure of things being closed when often we've been busier than ever is yet another example of how hard we've been working. And there are obviously lots of issues that COVID and the pandemic have thrown up. And often what those issues have revealed are the long-standing battleground arguments that we have with our employers have actually been laid bare in this moment. So whether that's years and years of pay cuts or people leaving the sector, lack of funding for our sectors, which have meant to, cause closures, all of these things have been laid bare. All of the problems that we already knew were there have been exposed. And for many of us, this is more apparent than ever in workload. So the extent to which we're having to do or being requested to do extra things, the leverage that's been put on us that if we cared about the students who are in our colleges or in our universities, we'd be doing these things, our own professional drive to actually want to do the best, but also actually the expansion of the working day that we've seen as a result of the working conditions. So there's so many issues here, and they're not kind of peripheral, they're not secondary at all to the health and safety concerns that we're raising or the funding concerns that we have been raising. They're really, really central, and they are only going to become more central, especially if we end up back, as I know is already happening in colleges, and will happen in universities if we end up back in local lockdowns or with certain student cohorts or bubbles having to self-isolate. These working challenges will only increase. So there's no better time, indeed I would say it is the perfect time for us as a union to be looking at this. So what I just want to do is kind of give you a bit of a flavour and an overview of what we're doing before passing back on to Lydia so that she can kind of talk through the details of what this campaign is in this region. Because, as you know, the push online to get materials online, to be teaching online, to be available, was hard enough. But in addition to that, there's been amazing work that's obviously had to happen to get people back in the classroom, to get people back on our college campuses and on our university campuses. And I think in particular, FE as a sector had to work incredibly hard throughout the summer. I know people like Lydia and her counterparts in the regions in England and in Wales and Scotland, and not Scotland because Scotland for universities, but not FE, and in Northern Ireland worked incredibly hard on risk assessments to ensure that people would be safe. But what we've had to see now, obviously, is the return to people being back in their classrooms, being back on their campuses. And what I wanted to say, really, I think to everyone in FE who's already back and doing that, is what a spectacular job you've all been doing. We've had some amazing reports of members in colleges really ensuring that their campuses are safe. There's been amazing pressure from government to ensure that age range of 16 to 18 have been back in the classroom. And we now have a massive amount of work on our plates to ensure that those classrooms and that learning and that working is done as safely as possible. We are aware that obviously this is leading to huge workloads, to an increased timetable, as I say, to expand the working day. But I think what's really powerful about this campaign, and we've already had a load of questions submitted that we're going to go through, is we don't just have to accept these things. Like, we are in a position to do something about it. We are able to push back, and we are able to erect new boundaries and say that this expansion of our working lives to accommodate health and safety is unacceptable. And that's essentially one of the main things I think we're here to do. So the kind of battleground that's already been drawn and the FE are contending with is really important and is here and now. And that's obviously coming down the track for those of you who are watching this from FE. One of the things that was also really interesting nationally that's happened this week, and it does tie into our ability to defend ourselves at all, but particularly on things like health and safety and workload, is the Jane McAlevey organising strike school, which some of you may have signed up to. We closed registrations for that on Monday, and we had over 370 members enrol to be involved. With a huge spread and actually lots and lots of members from FE branches. And this is going to be crucial because for those of you who are on branch committees who are part of this call, and one of the questions that have been sent in are about how do we push back? How do we inspire confidence? How do we rectify the feeling that some people feel that they're a bit cast adrift, or that there isn't a sufficient number of people in your particular branch to feel that you can really mobilize back? What we're trying to create with this organising school is more and more people who are engaged, who know how to organise, who know what we need to do, who understand the need to campaign outside of necessarily big campaigning events like this, the importance of drawing in new activists, all of these things. So the fact that in our first cohort, a union of our size, we're about 129,000 UCU, we've got 370. Jane McAlevey was on a call with me last night, and she said that we are percentage of membership, the most impressive union for recruits in our first cohort. To put it in context, the NEU only managed to get 200 through on their first cohort. So we are building, and we will continue to build. There'll be more of this organising course. So if this passed you by, but you think it's something that you want to be involved in, we'll be doing it again in the spring term. Because what I really, really want to create in this union is, a complete army of people on the ground who understand organising, who understand how to organise for power, so that it's not going to always fall to people who've been burnt out. Nobody knows better than I think the staff of your union how hard everyone's worked. We're included in that. I think many of us have run on adrenaline throughout lockdown to get all of this stuff in place, wondering when it's going to end, wondering when it's going to get easier. And, it's not clear that it is, but the one way it gets easier is if we build a bigger team, if we get better at organising, we get smarter with how we do it, and we organise and bring in more people. So I think I'm just going to kind of end on that sort of note, because these campaigns are important and essential, and they're going to give you the tools on the ground to push back. But we only protect ourselves in our workplaces by building bodies on the ground, by building a team of people and working with those people to show our employers that we have leverage, and that we're, you know, when we say we want something and we demand something, there's a kind of a noise behind us. So I'm really interested to hear the things that Lydia is going to talk you through. Me, Jane and Lydia are then going to do some questions, and I think Jane's going to say some things as well. So if you've got any questions, add them. We'll be getting through as many as we can. We've already had a lot submitted, so we won't probably get through everything. But if you haven't enrolled in this organising school, do keep your eye out for the one that we do next time, because building a mass sort of membership who are going to work hard with us on these campaigns is really what's going to win us the results that we need and deserve. So I will finish there, but I'll be back for Q&As.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Jo. So just to set this in some kind of context, UCU nationally has been running for some time now a workload campaign that's been using the rights that we get under health and safety legislation to push back against excessive workloads and to engage with employers to try and actually make the situation better for members. And that's completely the right approach that we need to be taking. The difficulty we have at the moment is that it does take some time. I know that Kit from the Open University is here, and he could probably tell you just how long it takes, because he's been working on their workload campaign for several years now and doing brilliant work. But what we've seen in lockdown, however, is that there's an exponential rise in the workloads of our members, and whether that's through designing new online teaching, or whether it's learning to get to grips with new IT systems, or handling huge numbers of queries, there isn't any aspect of our membership that hasn't been affected by lockdown in relation to their own workload. And what we wanted was to try and deliver something to you that would assist you with handling that. We know that for many of you, the summer holidays wasn't much of a holiday. Have I frozen, Rebecca? Or has Rebecca frozen? I'm pausing slightly. Just checking internet connections. Sorry about that. Right, okay, so I'm afraid Rebecca's frozen, not me. I'm going to carry on talking and hopefully she'll be able to get back in with us, but apologies for that. So just to say, we know that for many of you, the summer holidays weren't actually much of a holiday. We know that you were all working really hard to look at creating safe environments for students to come back to. And regardless of the fact that we don't believe that actually face-to-face teaching is a sensible idea at the moment, and particularly not given the our numbers that we're seeing, we know that you have been working to do that, and preparing for the spring term is going to be another stress. And as one of my reps said to me recently, he said it's been bad enough preparing for the autumn term, where we at least had the summer holidays where we could spend our time doing that, which is not how you should spend your holidays. But for the spring term, we're going to be in real difficulties because we don't have that time that we can use. So there is no additional time that we can find to do some of that planning. And that is going to be problematic. And we need to make sure that we're raising with employers that you need time. You need the time to be given to you. Hello, Rebecca. Sorry about that. You need the time to be given to you to be able to prepare to deliver the quality teaching that they say they want to be able to deliver. The other problem that we're seeing at the moment is that because of the pandemic, because of lockdown, and because of the measures that people are having to take to be safe, that those opportunities to chat to your colleagues and to share information with your colleagues about your working lives and about how much work you're doing are not really there. There aren't the social spaces, or staff are at home and feeling more isolated. And the danger for us is that that's a time when people can be picked off, and it's very hard to feel that you can counter that when you feel that you're on your own and you haven't got a cohort of colleagues to work with, which is obviously where the union comes in and where we can actually assist with that, because the strength of the union lies in our collective ability to respond to these challenges. So what we as a region wanted to do was to look at ways in which we could support individual members and then also support branches to take it at a higher level to actually try and address these concerns. Our campaign is going to focus on 4 key areas for members. So the first is that it's time for a break. Staff are entitled to a break. I'm imagining at the moment you're all sitting in your rooms laughing at the prospect of having a break, but you are legally entitled to a break, whether that's to have a lunch break or also, and more importantly at the moment, the display screen equipment breaks. The regulations there say that you should be having 5 to 10 minutes break in every hour. I would imagine that many of you would just welcome such an opportunity and can't even see it as a reality at the moment. But those are your legal rights. You have a right to enforce those legal rights. You have a right to have those breaks. So that's part of the campaign. And the second strand is it's time to be safe. So again, particularly with those people that we know are going back into campus, there is going to be an increased requirement for you to do things like wash your hands. There's going to be an increased requirement for you to clean your workstations. We've got some institutions where actually the teaching staff are being expected to clean most of the room in between student cohorts. And actually you need time to do that and paid time to do that. We have one example of an institution where staff are expected to clean in between teaching sessions and they're not being paid for that time. So we've got a major issue about having time to be safe and actually being paid to be safe. And that's again about the employers recognising that if they want a safe campus and a COVID secure campus, then they have to make sure that they provide you with the resources and the time to do what's necessary and what they're promising to students. The third strand is the time to prepare. And that comes back to being able to prepare both for lessons that you're doing or for services that you're providing, actually having the time and the space to think about it and not running from one thing to the next with no time in between. And that also includes time to prepare for next term when we will have more things that are going to be happening to us. So all of this needs to be factored into your workload. You need to be given time in your workload plans to actually prepare for the work that you're doing. And again, this goes back to a quality issue for employers. If they want quality education, then staff have to have time to prepare it. And then finally, the last strand is time to learn. And this is really important. We know that learning and development is an integral part of your professional role. And that the changes to the way that you do your jobs actually should have the support and resources from your employer. They should be supported there. You should be given time again to learn how to do these things, to learn new equipment, to learn about new ways of working. And again, these are the things that seem to be squished out of your working day and put into your own time, and that's not acceptable. So those are the 4 key strands. And there are 2 elements then to the campaign. Firstly, there is supporting members. So every member in the region is going to be receiving a campaign pack. And in that, there's going to be template emails covering a whole range of these issues that you can then use to send off simply to your line manager to say, I haven't got this time in my timetable, or I haven't, with the workload you've given me, got time to do these things, and I have a right to this time. How are you going to address it? So there's the individual ability to raise these concerns. And alongside that are going to sit campaign materials. So you will be sent, and I think we're going to be able to get those up on screen quite soon. You will be sent, thank you, Ed, backgrounds that you can use in your own meetings that will say that it's time for your break. You can use them on Zoom calls, you can use them on Teams meetings, whatever platform you're using. You can set these as backgrounds so that there's a constant message being given. Again, this goes back to the way that we're isolated. In a normal time, we would be looking at putting up posters or wearing stickers or any of those sorts of ways of doing it. So we're providing you with online materials that you can use in your online environments. And all of these, there's a whole assortment. You can choose them, and we should be able to also give you the logos that you can superimpose on your own backgrounds so that we have a constant message back to employers that they can see of us asserting our rights to say we have time and we should be given time to do all of those activities. So that's the kind of individual membership part of it. What members also should do in order to tackle this is get more involved in their branches. Or I know lots of you are already really involved in your branches, but get more involved in your branches because the collective response is the best way. And there are loads of roles that you can take in your branch. Even simply turning up to a branch meeting makes a massive difference. In terms of workload, we have been creating health and safety workload reps who look specifically just at the issues of workload. So that's another role that you could take on if you wanted to. But we then need to support the branches in making claims to the employers that deal with these concerns. And so we're issuing bargaining guidance that will go out to each of the branches that will support branches making short-term claims, not a whole full workload claim, but a short-term claim that actually looks at some of these specific issues about having time for breaks and time to prepare, that addresses issues related to online lesson observations, the things that's coming up now because of the different way in which we're working during the pandemic. So branches will be getting the support for that. And the regional office is going to prioritise supporting those branches that are putting in those claims. And the branches need you as members to support them putting those claims with employers. So that's the branch part of it. And I can go into that in more detail, and I will talk to the reps about that in more detail at our next reps briefing. All of this then sits under the national campaign on workloads. And all of the short-term claim, model claim that we've drawn up actually has in it a claim to then have a longer workload claim and actually break down the workload and make sure that it is clear and transparent and most of all fair. So all of this fits within the national campaign. They're not two separate things. We work under the umbrella of the national campaign. So on that note, I've talked for enough. That sort of nicely takes us over to Jane Thompson from our National Bargaining and Negotiating Unit. And as I said, she's written an awful lot of the guidance and is the expert in all of this. So at this point, you are the expert, Jane. I am going to hand over to Jane.
You're on mute, Jane, at the moment. Jane, you might just need to unmute yourself. Sorry, can't hear you.
Thank you. I thought I'd done that. Well, just to quickly say, hello, lovely to see you, even though I can't see you. Lovely to see this campaign kicking off in the region. I think it's a really good complement to the national campaign that we've got. As Lydia said, the It's Your Time campaign has been running for a few years. It's a campaign that a number of branches have had success with, but it is very engaged. There's a lot to do with it. It's a long-term campaign. We have a sort of a timetable for it, and it's been successful. It's probably run over probably a couple of years to really get embedded. But we're aware, and the region's aware, that we need some wins now. We need to get something off the ground now before people start going under, because that's the reality of what's going to happen. Those that you have managed to survive this summer, as Lydia says, probably wasn't much of a summer. Unfortunately, there isn't a magic wand. Lydia asked me to mention some of the sort of legal protections, and they are there, but they're not a magic make the workload go away. It doesn't work like that. So there is a duty on the employer to look after your health, safety and welfare, and there is a duty on them to manage any risks, and workload is a risk in terms of stress and mental health. And that's quite clear. And that's what we've built the national campaign on. So there definitely is a duty on employers. But it's not just going to happen unless we on the ground are making that happen and we're making the noise. And I think one of the things that really resonated with me, what Lydia was talking about branches putting in campaigns, they need the noise behind them. They need all members to be raising this at a very, very local level in the first instance, so that when this goes into management and when the senior management team meet, all the managers are going, oh God, yeah, all of our staff have been saying this and moaning about this and asking about this, so that they know it isn't just a couple of reps who are complaining about this. This is an issue that's been felt by the whole branch. So it's about being vocal and there being noise behind that negotiation. The team has done a brilliant job in developing those template emails that Lydia talked about earlier, which will be sent out to you all, which give you, as individual members, the ability to say to your manager, I can't do this. Where is my time for my break? I'm looking at my timetable. There's no room for a break. When are you going to put a break in? I'm entitled to a break. There's no lunchtime. You're expecting me to work too many hours. You're expecting me to have contact with students well beyond my agreed contact hours, etc., etc. So those are brilliant, and obviously they can be adapted to fit local circumstances, but those tools will be with you. But I also want to think about how practically you do it when you're just being given more and more work. One of the things that quite often employers talk about workload models is to ensure a fair allocation of work. And I think we need to keep going back to, that's one of the points of a workload model or a workload agreement or whatever it is we've got. The other one is to make sure that you can do all of your duties within either your contracted or your reasonable hours in a week if you haven't got contracted hours. Because if everyone's overworked, it might be fair, but it's still not right. And so it's not just about how you split up the cake, it's the size of the cake in the first place. And if there aren't enough people to do everything they want to do, they've either got to reduce the workload or employ more staff to do it. Now, that isn't your job as individual employers to say what should be done and shouldn't done. But what we need to be doing as individuals is pushing that back to managers saying, right, this is what I've worked out this will take me to do. These are my working hours. Clearly, they do not fit. Which of these things do you not want me to do? Or help me prioritize. How do you want me to prioritize this work? Or I am not going to be able to do this, this, and this. If you're unhappy with that, tell me which other things I shouldn't do to allow me to do this, this, and this. Or the fact that you want me to provide this online support to students takes my contact hours 5 hours a week over my contracted contact hours. Can you please take away some of the scheduled teaching to allow that additional support to happen? Because there are all these things that have happened because of COVID that we are having. I mean, the workload was bad enough anyway, but we've increased the workload. Students are going to need more support probably. They're going to need more support just to understand the technology in which we're using to deliver nowadays. For catch up, smaller groups, is it going to involve more, more working? If you're having to do 2 cohorts of the same lesson, that's more work. You're having to learn new technology to deal with this stuff. You're perhaps having to write 2 different sets of programs, one to deliver online, one to deliver on person. Again, doubling your workload. So that all needs to be quantified, and that won't appear in any workload model that we've got. Even the best workload models will not have predicted this rapid change in the way that we're working. So we need to identify locally the things that are the most pressing. And I think those are the things where it is worth, connect with your branch, obviously, be part of that, but actually just talking to all your colleagues within a group, if you're all delivering the same thing or just on your corridor or however you're organised at work, who you would talk to at work. If you were there, who would you be chatting to? Make sure you're talking to those people and try and do something collectively, even if it's not under the banner of UCU. We've all had a chat about this. We've realised that actually preparing in this way adds 2 hours a week to our workload. Can you please advise which other work you don't want us to do to be able to do this? Or can we have additional support to do this? Now, I'm not saying you're right and they'll agree and go, absolutely, we'll get more staff in. That clearly won't happen. But we need to start there. But they need to know that the workload they're expecting to be done is unreasonable. And they need to be given the option of prioritising and removing some of the workload from you. And we need to start saying either the workload reduces or you get additional staff. Obviously, the latter is preferable. We'd love to have more staff. We'd actually like to have a lot of those staff you've already sacked back in the workplace to carry out this work. But that's what we need to start. We need to start to be saying, I cannot do this. These are the things you're asking me to do. This is how long it will take me to do. Therefore, that's why I can't do it. If you continue to put pressure on me to do it all, it will cause me ill health. It will lead to a detriment to my mental health. And I think it's important we say that up front as well. And I don't want to look at the point at which people are falling down and go, oh, well, we're brilliant, we'll win loads of personal injury cases because we've told them this will happen. No, it's happened because actually none of us want that to happen. We don't want any of you to fall down. Even if you win a case afterwards, that's not what we're about. But we are about saying to employers, giving them due warning, we think this is what's going to happen. There will be a detriment to my mental health if you continue to load me like this. I cannot do this work. And obviously the reason I'm saying collect together is it's just easier. If a few of you who are delivering the same thing all say it's not possible, it's just easier. It takes the pressure off individuals. So try and group together locally. And we've had quite a few questions in about, how do I do this? What do I do? And they just keep saying that. And I think it is about trying to quantify what you're doing. You've all been doing this for quite a long time under COVID, the pandemic now. So be able to say to your employer, well, I know it takes me this long. And I've talked to my other colleagues and they're all taking that long. So it's not unreasonable. I'm not being particularly slow or whatever, but I can't do it. This is taking longer than needed. So what do you not want me to do? We've had a question about when it becomes bullying. And I think if you've told your employer, your manager at this level, you've spoken to your manager and said, I cannot do this work. What do you want me not to do? Or what support can you give me, or help or assistance you can give me to get through this workload? And that will be detrimental to my mental health if you don't either reduce my workload or provide more people to do the workload. And they ignore it, or they carry on. I think that will fall into the definition of bullying in most of your bullying agreements locally, because giving people a workload that is unattainable is usually one of the steps. It's certainly in the ACAS guidance, one of the identifiers of what bullying is. If they know you cannot do it, you've told them it'll be detrimental to you, and they carry on doing it, I think you could then start saying it's bullying. Again, we don't really want to be going down that path, because then we just get into conflict with the employer about, we've got a claim, we've got a bullying claim, we've got a grievance. But it may go there, that's where it may end up. You give them the option to start with. You're reasonable with it. You say, this is the work you're asking me to do. This is the time it will take me to do it. That's 10 hours over my contracted hours a week. What do you want me not to do? Or who else can help me do this work? We've also had a question about how senior lecturing staff from a university in ARU are getting loaded with all the additional work that used to be carried out by sessional staff or associate lecturers or whatever you call your casualised teaching staff. And I think it's something that goes back to the campaign we were running at the beginning of the summer about trying to link the campaign for jobs with the campaign on workload, the inevitability of sacking, dismissing, whatever we want to call it, a load of people on casualised contracts on the workloads of those that remain was so inevitable. And we need to go back to that. And we need to say, how do you expect us to do the work of double the amount of people? In addition to all this extra stuff we've got to do, you need to bring those people back, preferably on better contracts than they were on before. In the first stage, they need to be back in employment. It's being used as an excuse to get rid of people. We need to kick off about workload and the impact that's having on us. And that's a way that, more secure staff and casualised staff can actually really work together, because it's the same fight. Having adequate staff, not having an excessive workload, and a fight against casualisation are all part of the same thing. So I'm probably not going to say much more. Just we'll answer some of the more of the questions. Like I say, keep up the noise. Tell your manager. Keep telling them. It's easy to moan about it in a chamber, but you need to start getting evidence of you telling them, and make sure you put it in writing. Obviously, if you have a conversation, follow it up with an email. Get together with your colleagues to do that. Give support to your branch in putting that claim locally. We've got loads of stuff on the national campaign on additional stuff you might want to try and insert into an existing workload campaign to pick up some of the issues around COVID. That advice is out there. The regional office can help you access all of that, and obviously give you support if you're putting in a new claim. And very best of luck.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Jane. And I think the one thing that I would say to branch officers as well, because I know that your workloads is immense and your union workload is immense, and you're probably feeling tired at the prospect of doing anything else. So in the model claims, there's a whole variety of things that you can ask for. If you only go for one of those things will make a difference to our members. Just changing one aspect of it will make a huge difference to our members. So it's about making sure that you're also looking after yourselves, because I am very conscious that our local reps are doing a vast amount of work and they also need to be looked after. So just bear that in mind. You don't have to aim for the moon. We can do it in small steps and build up and build up and build up, and actually then will make a massive difference. But one little thing changing will make a huge difference to your members. So thank you very much for all of that to both Joe and Jane. And if it's okay now, we're just going to move on to some of the questions. I meant to say thank you as well to Ed Bailey. He's in the background. He's the mastermind behind all of this.
Can I just say one thing? Because everything Jane said is so right in terms of make the managers manage. You know, we get so many tasks that are put across our desk, and bouncing them back up and saying, tell us all is a really effective way to increase their workload.
Yep, indeed it is. And also, though, I have to say we've got lots of managers who are in membership, and they need to be doing the same thing as well. It needs to go right back up to the very top, to the senior management team who are sitting happily making these decisions. And the people that quite often get squeezed in the middle are a lot of the middle managers, the program leaders, the course leaders. Those are the people who are desperately running around trying to make things happen. So everybody's got a workload issue with this one, apart from some of the people I sit across the table from in meetings with. Right, okay, Ed, have we got a first question to come up, please? There we go. Oh, yes. So this goes to the heart of it, doesn't it? We've got so many places that have workload calculations and workload programs and workload systems, and they all say, but your workload system says it's absolutely fine. But actually the reality of the work that's been assigned to people is vastly different. And this goes back to something that Jane was saying about gathering evidence and gathering information, and linking up with people that do the same job. One of the things we know that happens to individuals with excessive workload is that they're made to feel that somehow it's their fault, that it's because they're not good enough, that they can't do it fast enough. And we know that that is nonsense. So it's about talking to your colleagues and saying, who are doing the same jobs, this is how long it's taking me, how long is it taking you, gathering evidence for it and going back to your manager and saying, it's in my system as doing this, but actually it's taking this. So the reality isn't measured up by our workload system, and it's no good just using the workload system. You need to make a change. One of the things that we want to do with the collective claims is actually look at these workload systems and make them more representative and fairer and actually realistic. Their systems should be realistic. The only way we're going to deal with that is we gather the evidence to show that they're not. So that's your first step. I don't know whether anybody else wants to comment on that.
Can I just add that just going back to that individual thing about making people feel they're inadequate, and managers, I've heard it before, well, nobody else is complaining. And actually, sometimes when you speak to people, how do you manage to do it all? Oh, I do it after I put the kids to bed, or I do it at weekends, or I do all my research and my scholarly activity and my CPD and any learning I need for my job in my own time. Now, one, that's not acceptable. It's a workload issue. But two, not everyone can do that, and that becomes an equality issue for us as well. So even if your colleagues don't appear to be struggling, ask them if they're managing it to do it in their contracted or their nominal contracted hours, because that's the key question.
Brilliant. Thank you. All right, on to the next one, I think. Yes. We all sigh at this one. And again, it's very similar to the first question, isn't it? It's about having a computer program that has a fixed idea, has been told the fixed idea of what workload is, and it goes back to the answer of gathering the evidence. The only way that you're going to be able to deal with that is to gather the evidence, and whether it's actually turning around and saying, even by your own calculations in this system, this is a half a day extra on top of what I should be doing, or whether it's simply saying, when I do all of this, this is how long it takes, and making sure that you go back to your employer and say, this is not reasonable, this is not working in a reasonable way. So there is always some flexibility in systems, and we do know that people will sometimes take on, fluctuations in workload, that you might have an additional 10% happening one week, But what we need to make sure is that if there is a temporary increase, it is temporary. It's not fundamental. It's not built into your life. You don't get an increase of 10% and then the next week an increase of a further 10%. If you're going to take work that takes you over the actual calculation, then you have to have it paid back to you. It can't just exist like that. So again, it's about gathering the evidence, and it's about going back to your manager and also talking to your branch about this, because this is what we talk to managers about and employers about all the time, that you can't ask people to do more without at some point giving them less.
And I think
that's the claim.
I think
Sorry.
to add to that, though, this is where the collective approach of talking to people and what Jane was saying is really important, because, you know, they may just be squeezing a tiny amount of time from everybody to the point where everybody goes, can I accommodate that? Maybe. But if collectively in your, you know, your teaching group or your group, there's 10 of you, 20 of you, 30 of you, and they're squeezing this from everyone, being able to collectively say, you are taking this from us. So that's really important. But as you say, on an individual basis, if there is an encroachment and an increase, saying, well, if I'm going to do this, how am I going to get it back, and when, and what are the guarantees? And doing that collectively is so much stronger. Like individually, obviously, you have to keep track of your own individual circumstance, but the collective kind of configuration of that bigger number, and then the collective demands of guarantees for how it will be protected in the future, have been crucial at every time I've ever faced any workload issues.
Yes, indeed. Can I just throw in an extra one as well, because it's been flagged up in one of the questions about professional staff and academic related staff, that quite often they're not even covered by the computer programs and the workload models that we get. And in fact, I sat in a meeting just yesterday or the day before with an employer who said, but you can't quantify that time. That's not possible. That is clearly ridiculous. I have to say, it's a stupid response, and we told the employer that they were being stupid when they said that. You can quantify anybody's work in that way. Nobody's work is so extraordinary that you can't quantify what they do. And so again, that goes back to the putting in a collective claim and saying that actually, if there is a workload model that doesn't cover those staff, it should be expanded to cover those staff, and that we just need to identify how we're going to quantify what their work is and what a reasonable workload is. There is no member of staff who shouldn't be able to be covered by a workload model, and who doesn't have a right to have some systematic approach to their workload. Okay, moving on. Who wants to pick this one up?
I think I sort of covered both of those in what I said before.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's about quantifying it, telling them you can't doing it, setting it out in writing, asking them to make the decision about what you don't do. Yeah, as I said, just keep loading people definitely can, because when you know that someone cannot cope with that amount of work, just to keep loading them certainly could be considered as bullying.
Brilliant, thank you. Should we move on, Ed?
This one's new.
Yep. Okay, Jo?
So particularly at HE, for those of you who are watching this from HE branches, you may be aware, and if you aren't, there is still time to register. There is a special sector conference at the end of this month, which is specifically on a COVID pay claim, where we are looking at how we synthesize the things that we would normally be campaigning about, and obviously health and safety and workload in particular is one of those. You know, it was part of the HE4 fights pay claim and dispute from this year. One of the things that we've been doing at HQ is really trying to pull together what that pay claim could look like, what are the really important things that should go into it, how we can protect people regarding workload in this moment in time, and how that needs to be kind of specifically focused around the issues that COVID and online working, lockdown, and all of those things have thrown up, but how that obviously connects to our longer term and forward planning campaigning around this issue. So I would say, and somebody else might want to address this for FE, but if you're in a HE branch in particular, making sure that you've got delegates registered for that conference at the end of this month is important, because this will be debated there. We'll be putting forward some ideas about what we think is important in this moment. So if you're on a branch committee, or if you're just from a branch and you're interested and you don't know who those delegates are, I would say get in touch with your committee, find out what's happening at that conference. It's on the 30th of September. And I'll be contacting HE members, particularly about this COVID claim. But obviously there's a whole other issue for FE. So I don't know if either Jane or Lydia wants to say something.
Yeah, I'll pick that one up really happily. Just to say that in our FE branches in the region, a number of them, when they were putting in their local claims on pay, put in the last year or so, workload claims as well. So your branches, a number of branches have already picked that up and have already started working with their employers on workload campaigns in further education. So again, it's about getting involved in your branch, and where we've got FE branches that haven't done that yet but are interested in doing that, huge amount of resources that we can give you to support you, and there's a huge amount of work we can do to make those claims feasible and proper. So do get in touch with your local reps and find out whether they've done anything on this, and if so, what's happening, and if so, can you help? Jane.
I'd also where branches will be in discussion with the employer about returns to the workplace, I think there is scope within that to be saying, okay, so you're saying there'll be hand wash stations, you're saying there'll be cleaning. How does that relate to our workload model? Are we putting that into our workload model? Okay, we've got to have small class sizes, so we split the classes into two. How are we amending the workload models to reflect that? So every time they bring up a thing that we're trying to do to protect the health and safety and from a COVID point of view to the students and staff, think about how that impacts on workload and be asking the question back to the employer, what amendments are you making to workload planning to allow and facilitate the health and safety work return to the workplace?
And I think just to add to that, one of the things that we produced over the summer, and I think Jay mentioned it a little bit earlier, was we developed it particularly with reference to how we could help defend casualised staff in our sectors who were losing their jobs or contracts not being renewed, and how people who were securely employed could operate within their remit of influence, if you like, to try and draw attention. And a lot of that was around workload. So as you say, it's about quantifying what additional and extra things you need to do, making it clear if this means the expansion of the working day where you get that time back in other areas. If you are being forced to, at the minute, as I know a lot of members are, prepare for face-to-face, but also prepare for online because you're not sure what you're going to be delivering and you still don't know. Make sure that you're kind of quantifying that and pushing back on that in terms of, not allowing this to become the new normal, which we know is what employers and managers will always try and do. And where possible, as Lydia says, really linking it to, because I think most of it is, if this is what we're being required to do for social distancing, to spread the day out, making it crystal clear where the connections are. And yeah, if you can in your branch, making it a broader campaign about employment, about retaining casually employed staff. This is an all hands on deck moment. There's no way that this can be delivered safely by making staff just work more and more and more. And that includes kind of travel into work, the times you would be traveling. Really build all these things together, I would say, in the case that you put forward, and make it clear that this isn't just a kind of a one issue kind of campaign that you're putting together in your branches. And I think for me, that's how you then bring other people into this campaign that might have normally sat outside of it and said either I'm not in the union, so I'm not that bothered, or I'm just not an activist and I don't normally get involved, because actually what you're doing is demonstrating to lots of different groups of people who do lots of different roles within your college or university how this affects us all. And I think that's really important.
Brilliant, thank you. So how can we ensure that we're not being required to use admin time to communicate with teacher or mentor online learners? Yes, and we're seeing that a lot, where the workload actually isn't being reflected in what we're being told the workload is. And again, this all comes back down to gathering that evidence and making it clear to the employer that there is a set amount of time and that time is being used up, and you do need that time for admin or time to prepare or time to learn, all those other things that we've identified that you need to do. So again, it's about gathering the information, getting together with your colleagues, making noise. I think making noise is the key message to take from this. Jane, did you want to come in on that at all? Or
just very quickly, if you have got a local agreement which gives you a maximum student contact time per week, which a lot of FE colleges do, making sure that in what is included in contact time reflects the post-COVID or the COVID pandemic blended learning type situations we're going into, or the social distance or whatever we've got to do. So going back to the agreement you've got, looking at it and saying, well, we hadn't thought of that. Of course you hadn't thought of it. Who would have thought of it, a year ago? So, but then that's something easy. You can go back to the employer and say, well, look, none of us thought of this, but we think this needs to be added into contact time, so that if it's 20 hours a week, 24 hours a week, whatever, that additional mentoring time that I'm having to do online or repeat classes have all got to be included on that. So, you need to adjust my timetable accordingly.
Brilliant, thank you. Have we got another one, Ed? Yes. We've touched on this slightly. Jo, do you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is a pattern of behaviour, obviously, that predates COVID. The idea that they can intensify workloads while simultaneously treating precariously employed staff as if they're, disposable, is a trend that has obviously continued. What the union can do is what people are willing to do in their branches. That is always the answer. I mean, there's a number of things that we can do nationally in terms of the way in which we campaign, the claims that we put in, the pressure that we're able to bring to bear. But really what needs to happen in the workplace is that senior people who do normally enjoy a degree of security need to join together in the ways in which has been outlined in this meeting, deploy their own evidence, so in the casualised, the 10 steps of solidarity for casualised staff, we said to members, you need to quantify the workload that is being done by these people. You need to ensure that collectively in your, whether it's a department, in your team, that you make it clear that you will not be adopting this excessive workload. They're the main ways in an institution that you push back. There was a number of other things in the steps to solidarity that we included that you as individuals can make noise, so especially in this time, I think, you remember, Jane, there was things like the out of office that you would put on your email as a permanent signature saying that you are not doing the work. We issued some legal advice to branches about the extent to which you could say, this is not my work and we won't be doing it. But I think you have to be really forthright and clear in your branches and in your departments and in your teams what you're not doing. We said it should be an agenda item on every meeting that you have, the amount of workload that isn't being done or the tasks that are not being done because they've been allocated to people and the people who used to do them have not had their contracts renewed. That's the way really that senior people are able to carve out space to fight for casualised staff. And I think the benefit of our union is that often, as Lydia said, we have members all through the kind of management and hierarchy chain of our institutions. Who are the people in your institution that are UCU members who could be helping, and really kind of think that through and advocate and campaign locally to make this an issue that everybody cares about. The national union, we generated a hell of a lot of press coverage during lockdown about the amount of casualised members whose jobs were due to be cut or non-renewal of contracts, what that meant for the sector. The sort of data that's been produced, I think you can use on a local level as well. Jane, I don't know if you want to say anything about that in addition, but
I think the one other thing, we talk, and it's two sides of the same coin, me saying quantify what you can't do. But when we were talking about it from a job cuts point of view, we were saying to people, quantify what people under threat are doing, and therefore will not be done when those people are cut. And it's the same thing, because if they're not doing it, who's doing it? It's the extra work you're being given. And I think the other thing we haven't touched on, the other body we haven't touched on, is your local NUS, if you've got an organised NUS. Telling them about the levels of cuts that have been put in place and how that will affect their student experience. Because while you'll all go flat out to make that the best it can possibly be, there is going to be an impact if you get rid of that many staff or you try and dump that onto the staff that remain. So I think involving students' union in the campaign is really important as well.
I just want to really echo that, because whether it's FE level or HE, every industrial action that this union has taken this year, the students of that college or of that university have invariably been completely behind the branch. Our union, I think, is better than any other union of being able to bring on board stakeholders that normally the employer would try and weaponise against us. I think we're better than any other union of campaigning and explaining the injustices of our workplaces, especially to students, and as I say, to other kind of community stakeholders. So I think it's really important, as Jane says, to not just have this as our own kind of industrial workload issue, which clearly it is, but to actually communicate that to students about what it means for them, what it means to, you know, parents for the student experience, what it means more broadly, and really, yeah, I mean, it might not be the language that we value, but the metrics actually do speak for themselves for some people. And I think we kind of have to use whatever communities we know will be affected and really explain it to them.
Fab. Thank you. We've got a tiny bit of time left, and we have one last question, which I think is the absolute crunch question. Yes, we've all come across those bosses, haven't we? And this is where you get to the nub of it. So, you know, we'll give you the tools to raise it with your manager. But what do you do when your manager says? You just have to get on with it. And that's where you have to go back to your branch. And that's where you have to stand up to these matters on a collective basis, because actually it's not good enough. And we do also find that there's a disparity between what's happening at a local level with management and what's happening at a senior level with management. And sometimes we can raise it round with the senior manager and say, this is, you know, you're setting these targets, you're setting these ambitions, you're saying 4 hours face-to-face teaching or whatever it might be that they're putting in place. And actually it isn't going to work. And your line managers are not actually then supporting their staff when they say they've got an excessive workload. So that's where, as long as you've made the noise down at your level, then the branch can raise it at a very senior level and we can start tackling that. But you go back into the branch, you talk to the branch about it, and we look at what kind of collective action we can raise. Jo?
Yeah, I think this is a bit cheeky on my part, but I'm going to go with it anyway. One of the things I would say is the way in which they say these sorts of demands to you matters too. The principals of colleges and university vice chancellors and they often have very thin skin for public scrutiny. So if you actually have them delivering this, you just have to get on with it message in the sort of cack-handed and very managerial way that they often do. And, you know, and you have that in staff emails or however it is they've chosen to communicate it with you. Make sure that your branch gets in touch with Lydia, you know, make sure that you pass that on to us, because often a little bit of public shaming, which we sometimes do nationally on behalf of branches, can actually roll back pretty disgraceful managerial decisions as quickly as they happen. And I know sometimes branches don't want to do that, and that's fine. But if you think that that's kind of the position that you're in, make sure that you get in touch with Lydia.
Brilliant. Okay, that was the last question. Jane, have you got any kind of fine points you want to add in on anything?
I don't think so. I think we covered it. Thank you.
Jo?
I think I just want to echo what I said at the beginning, really, that, you know, the way in which we build power and the way in which we protect ourselves and kind of push back against unacceptable demands in our workplace is us and what we're willing to do on the ground. At the time we have to set aside, and I know we don't want to do it because we're already busy with other things, but actually defending ourselves and pushing forward our interests is really important. And we have to do that, because what's been made clear during lockdown is whether it's college leaders, particularly in HE, university leaders and various government leaders, they're not going to do it. And much like we stood shoulder to shoulder with students with A-levels and BTECs, unapologetically spoke about injustice, you know, made it very clear the amount of staff time that had been wasted on this at FE and at HE level, made a really clear set of demands. You know, this isn't a kind of impossible situation where you can't push back and you have to accept the way things are, but being successful in that in this moment, there's no shortcuts to sort of having conversations with people, organising with people, explaining this to parents, to students, to other kind of stakeholders. So that's what we've got to do, but it's also not a zero-sum game, because anything that you do now will just make your branch, your college, your university stronger in the future, and mean that if they ever think about doing this sort of stuff again, they'll think twice, or actually you'll be in a position that they won't do that because you'll be putting forward a claim and actually making much more positive progress. So keep at it, I would say.
I don't think I can top that, to be quite honest. So on that happy note, I think it's the message is go out, make some noise, make noise locally, make noise with your senior managers, and actually make some changes. And hopefully the toolkits that you're going to be getting from us are going to help you do that. So thank you very, very much to everybody for attending today. This has been recorded, and I will be sending out the link to everybody so you can send it out around your branches as well if you think that would be useful. Really appreciate it. Thank you.